quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, take the first exit onto Burnham Lane. In a quarter of a mile, turn right onto Bath Road, A4.
Drug abuse. Dr. Emily Finch is Vice Chair of the Faculty of Addictions at the Royal College of Psychiatrists. Thank you very much for coming on the programme, Dr. Finch. I wonder first of all what it is, who is it that is dying as a result of drug poisoning in England and Wales?
Morning, Tom. It's important to remember that every one of these deaths is someone.
Turn right onto Bath Road, A4.
Partner, and each one represents a tragedy. What we know is that this group of people are largely male, 2/3 of them are men. They are aged between about 40 and 49. That's because what they are is a group of people who started using drugs in the 80s and 90s, and they have gradually got older. We've perhaps
Continue on Bath Road for 3/4 of a mile.
using particularly heroin, but there is this group that have continued to get older, and as they get older they have more physical health problems, they become more vulnerable to overdose, and what we're seeing is that group dying. We've also seen a dramatic reduction in the amount of money spent on drug treatment over the last 10 years in the period of austerity, which has resulted in significant disconnects between health, mental health and physical health and drug and alcohol services. So these people really aren't getting the help they need, and in a way they have bodies like people who are much older than them, because that's what the many years of drug misuse has done.
Is that to say then that what we're not seeing are large numbers of people who, for at the moment illegally, are recreationally using drugs like cocaine and dying as a result?
No, we're not. Most of when you talk about opiate deaths, actually what you're talking about is heroin.
Right.
You're right, it is heroin. And the cocaine users are a different group. I think we know less about them. Some of them will also be using other drugs like heroin. The other thing that's contributing is many long-term heroin users also end up using drugs like benzodiazepines, so drugs like Valium, although they're often using rather new types of benzodiazepines, usually bought on the internet in various ways.
Well, I also see codeine may well have contributed to overdoses, people not quite sure perhaps how much they've taken or how much they ought to take, and dying as a result, and that's a prescription drug.
Yeah, and in fact you can buy it over the counter in some forms. Yes, there will be a group of people using painkillers, probably fairly a small group in this, but there'll be a small group of people who died from painkiller abuse as well as illicit drugs.
Because in order to tackle some of this, a lot of the debate tends to go down the route of whether it's right to decriminalise or legalise some drugs. Do you think that actually that's the wrong debate to be having when you look at the detail of who is it that's dying and what they're dying of? That actually it's more about addiction treatment than it is about illegal stuff.
Yeah, I think for this group, this is likely to be a fairly...
In a quarter of a mile, at Huntercombe roundabout, take the first exit onto Huntercombe Spur heading to M4, London.
Opiates like it are really quite dangerous drugs, and people need help to stop them. So I don't think this drug-related deaths argument is about legalisation. It's about proper treatment and helping people stop the drugs.
Do we then say that we've just now got in this country and in Scotland and Wales, we just have more drug addicts?
We probably don't have drug addicts. What we've got is a group of ageing drug addicts who need very significant...
Exit the roundabout onto Huntercombe Spur.
We see more, the problem's regional. There's many more people dying in the northeast than there is in London, and that's probably to do with social deprivation and other social factors that make that group more vulnerable. I see
Keep left at the fork.
these problematically.
I know that you serve on the Advisory Council for Misuse of Drugs, and I understand that there's a consultation that has been put out.
In a quarter of a mile, merge onto M4.
Drugs that are considered at the top class of scheduling that may be looked at again to be rescheduled. I wonder what your view is on rescheduling drugs like psilocybin, the active
continue on M4 for 11 miles.
with these addictions, with drug addictions, that is going to lead them to die early in their 40s if they're males.
Well, we know there are good quality treatment hubs. We know getting people into opiate dependence treatment reduces deaths and is protective against overdose. We know high quality residential treatment helps people come off drugs. We know recovery communities support people to live much better lives. Many of you need significant psychosocial support. You know, these people are often homeless, don't
motorway.co.uk/COVID vaccination to book, or visit your local walk-in centre. The sooner, the safer. Every vaccination gives us hope.
Liverpool FC fans, welcome with us this pre-season. With LFC TV on Sky, you can follow the Reds as they prepare for the new season for just £7 extra a month. It's the only place to watch every pre-season game live and get exclusive behind-the-scenes access, including manager and player interviews. To upgrade, go to sky.com/LFC TV. See sky.com for more details. Sky TV required. Further terms apply.
Hi, I'm Zain, a customer service assistant for TfL. As you return to our network, let me remind you that you can travel safely because we're cleaning regularly with antiviral disinfectant, providing over 1,000 free hand sanitizer stations across the network, and our ventilation systems frequently circulate fresh air on our tubes, trains and buses. Please remember, you must wear a face covering over your nose and mouth at all times, unless you are exempt. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters. They don't chant your name when you give birth, or sing songs about you. But patients and their families will remember you forever. Because your blood can change their lives. We need more blood donors in Tooting, the West End and Edgware. Bleed for London. Join us today at blood.co.uk.
Nick the Orient Breakfast with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
We're talking a few moments time, Molly, by the way, we're talking a few moments time about the channel they taken in the Gulf by imported Iran, who have, as you know, already been accused of a drone strike that killed a British citizen on a tanker in the Gulf. I'll bring you the details on that in a few moments time. I shall come back to the idea of these drug death figures, two drugs in particular, cocaine and codeine on the first. The figures we've been talking about alarming and reflect the what we're seeing as rehabilitation centres like the we're talking about. Lots of that says that cocaine use is prevalent in lots of classes and used at all levels of society. There's been a huge rise in its availability, and it's as easy to get hold of as pizza. Often people get it delivered to their door. Whilst it says it's highly addictive, it's still seen as fashionable in many circles, and we see people whose lives are totally destroyed by it. Does that mean because it's so easy to get hold of that those who are addicts?
In 2 miles, at junction 3, take the A312 exit to Harrow, Hayes.
When it comes to codeine-related deaths have spiked by almost 25% in the last year to a record high. Ian Hamilton, a lecturer at the University of York, it's very sad to see this rise in deaths due to codeine. As with other drugs, most people die as a result of combining drugs, either to achieve a particular effect or to counter the effect of one drug by taking another. Now, the confusion I have is that to say that if you're given codeine prescribed by a doctor or you buy it over the counter in some forms, there are people who are using that drug to try and get high or to take the edge or whatever it might be, or are people accidentally taking too much and dying as a result? 0345 6060 973. What should be done to try and protect those who are, if not addicted already to some of these class A drugs, then at least going down the path of addiction? Should decriminalisation and legalisation be part of the options? Have your thoughts on that in just a few moments. Up in Scotland, there have been changes to the way in which you can live your life as a result of differences in the restrictions on coronavirus. Let's get the latest from Alan Szynski, LBC's reporter in Glasgow. Alan.
It's not well as of this morning. We've lived under COVID rules in some form in Scotland for exactly 500 days. But on Monday, most of them are coming to an end. No businesses will now be required to close under COVID regulations. That means that nightclubs will be able to open for the first time since March 2020. But despite that obviously being great news for a lot of businesses, Nicola Sturgeon's statement yesterday did seem to be laced with caveats at every turn. We heard more about what mitigations would remain in place rather than the freedoms that are going to actually be restored. And the First Minister stressed that the end of certain restrictions does not mean the coronavirus is no longer a threat.
While this move will restore a substantial
junction 3, take the A312 exit to Harrow, Hayes.
So, Tom, what are the caveats? Well, from Monday, the legal requirements on social distancing will be dropped, but not in schools yet. More of us can return to offices, but employers are still
Exit at junction 3.
a hybrid model. There's no limits on the number of people who can gather inside or outside, but rather confusingly, if it's over 2,000 inside or 5,000
In a quarter of a mile, at Cranford Parkway interchange, take the third exit onto the Parkway, A312.
They're going to be legally mandated in indoor settings for some time yet, which does raise the question: can you now go to a packed nightclub dance floor with no distancing, but you do still need to wear a mask? And coverings are also going to be staying mandatory in schools. Louise McSorley is a parent from Edinburgh, and she says her 2 children are not too unhappy with that.
They totally understand the need for it. They feel safer with them on. They know that they're protecting other people when they wear it, as much as, it protects them. And so they're absolutely willing to do it.
And just finally, Tom, Nicola Sturgeon had invited the Prime Minister to a meeting this week in Edinburgh to discuss all things COVID recovery. Last night we did find out Boris Johnson had turned that down. Instead, he says he hopes to have an in-person summit with all the devolved leaders in one room in the nearer future.
Great to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed, Alan Sazinski, LBC's reporter in Glasgow. 7:24. We'll come on to this issue of what's been going on in the Gulf, the hijacking of this tanker in just a moment. Meantime, Brendan's in Hartlepool. You want to talk drugs, Brendan? Hi.
Yeah, morning, Tom. Yeah, I think they should legalise every drug tomorrow and make them cheap enough for people to buy, so they don't have to steal. And if they're made by the big pharmaceutical companies, they'll be of decent quality, so people won't be getting the wrong overdoses and stuff like that. I mean, the only drug I take is alcohol, and I'm allowed to buy that. So why can't people who want to take drugs buy it at a reasonable price, and they don't have to rob little old ladies and mug them?
See, Brendan, this to me is the worst argument for drug legalisation, is to say, well, look at alcohol. Alcohol does tremendous damage. Alcohol's freely available to people. Why can't more drugs be like alcohol, freely available? For me, you just move what is a criminal problem, and it is a massive criminal problem. I'm not going to argue with you about that. You move it to a health problem. Look at the damage alcohol does. It's one of the most damaging. So what are we now saying? Oh, good, that's a good model. Let's have that. Let's make more drugs like alcohol. Let's make it freely available for people to get. You can buy it wherever you want. And let's
Exit the roundabout onto the Parkway.
As alcohol is.
Do you think it would be? How do you know? Would it be as how many people take drugs in the country now?
Continue on the Parkway for 1 mile.
This pizza to your front door. I would say quite a few.
Yeah. When you yeah, well, probably, I don't know, I've never taken coffee, I don't know how easy it's to get. But yes, you're right. You hear stories of everybody slips and cocaine, blah, blah, blah. But if it was reasonably, if it was cheap, it wouldn't, the biggest thing I think is the crime that's involved in trying to get money to get your drugs habit. That's the biggest thing that goes on.
Yeah.
People getting mugged and whatever, and robbed. Most burglaries are committed by heroin addicts, I've been led to believe. Was the need to fund the habit. If it was reasonably priced, they wouldn't have to fund the habit. If you're surviving a drugs habit, whether you then go over the top and have the health problems, I don't know.
Well, you're right that there's got to be a balance between the two. There is very little criminality around alcohol, isn't there? Not very much, really, given that it's been largely turned into a health problem because it's been so available for people. It's just whether or not, if drugs were much more available, much more easily available, more people would take them. Brendan, good to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed for your call. Let's turn to what's been going on in the Gulf. Tehran accused of a second shipping attack in a week as Britain, US and Israel threatened to strike back. Iranian-backed forces were suspected of seizing an oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman last night, just days after Tehran was blamed for a drone attack on another ship that killed a British crew member. The Royal Navy's UK Maritime Trade Operations Agency warned of a suspected hijacking incident near the port of Fujairah in the UEA, but did not give further details. Richard Mead is editor of Lloyd's List, the shipping industry's leading source of news analysis and data, and host of the Lloyd's List Shipping podcast. Good to speak to you, Richard. What more do we know about this incident, sir?
Well, we know that the tanker, which was a small tanker called the Asphalt Princess, is owned by a Dubai-based company, was seized yesterday afternoon. Details were initially a little bit shaky, but we quickly identified the fact that it was that tanker, and we know from people
quarter of a mile at Wagoners Roundabout, take the second exit and stay on the Parkway, A312.
It then started to head towards the Iranian coast, and we know that that was under the direction of those armed people aboard it. Then, about 3 a.m. this morning, it turned around and started heading back towards the Omani coast. What happened in between, we don't know, but we know that the US and UK navies were present monitoring the situation. So we can only assume that the boarders have now left the vessel, according to British naval sources, and the vessel has been declared safe. So we will no doubt find out what happened in between.
Why that boat?
Well, that is the great mystery. We've seen at least 20 attacks in what is shaping up to be a shadow war between Iran and Israel, but in most cases there has been a link.
Exit the roundabout onto the Parkway. Continue on A312 for 1.5 miles.
In most cases, we don't see any links here in this case, so we don't know why this particular ship has been hijacked. What we do know is that the company that owns this vessel owned another vessel that had been taken in 2019 by Iranian forces, albeit briefly, called the Rhea. At that point, that was on the pretext of apparently oil smuggling. So that is obviously going to be a line of inquiry.
And just briefly, Richard, what impact are all these hijackings in this particular part of the world having on the ability of other ships to transport their important cargo around the world?
Well, as I say, there are numerous attacks of this ilk happening and have been happening for the last 2 years, but they have been isolated to mainly assets that have been linked to either Iran, Israel or Saudi, and most other tankers in the operation area have been effectively deemed pretty safe. What's worrying everybody now is that we've obviously seen a British national killed as fallout of this operation earlier this week. We've seen a Romanian killed. We've seen tankers that are not directly linked to this shadow war now being targeted. If that is an escalation, that is going to be severely worrying for world trade, because you've got about 1/5 of the world's energy exports going through what is essentially an energy choke point in the Strait of Hormuz. That is very, very worrying for the shipping industry.
Good to speak to you, Richard Mead, you're editor of Lloyd's List, the shipping industry's leading source of news, analysis and data. After the news at 8,
what we're really trying to work out at this point in time is the relative protection that the vaccines provide for children, but I think we're very confident that vaccines would protect children to a high degree.
1.5 million 16 and 17-year-olds are set to be offered the jab, with a suggestion that this country would only be able to reach herd immunity if all over 12s are offered the vaccination. We'll get your thoughts on that. Tom Swarbrick on LBC 731. News headlines now. Simon Conway.
It's understood all 16 and 17-year-olds in Britain will soon be offered the coronavirus vaccine. The JCVI, the committee which advises the government on vaccinations, is expected to update its guidance. Currently, only teenagers that age with underlying health conditions are eligible for the jab. Research has found children who become ill with coronavirus are unlikely to have long-term effects. A study led by King's College London says illness lasted no more than a week on average in